All right, so today's training is going to be on LOIs, letter of intents, and PSAs are purchase and sale agreements. Starting off, anytime we write a new contract, either that being a listing agreement or a purchase agreement or even an LOI, we do want to fill out our buyer and seller forms. Now this is going to be found in our Dropbox location. This is going to help our transaction coordinator recognize who the buyers and sellers are, who the escrow and title reps are going to be as well. This has all their contact information, and this helps the office and again the transaction coordinator file your deals and reach out to your clients if need be. So this should be started with every contract that we have. The second important in-house document we have is our PEAK ABA. So this is going to be the affiliated business arrangement. This form tells your client all of the other entities that we own and work and are affiliated with. We must disclose this because if they ask us for financing or insurance and we send them to our company and we don't tell or disclose them that we own these companies, they can come back and say that we steered them into a direction. So we want to make sure that all parties fill this form out. Now this form should be given at the same time as the selling and buyer sheet at the beginning of any listing agreement or purchase agreement. Anytime you start conducting business with a client, you want to give them the affiliated business arrangement. It also lets them know that we have these other entities and services available. And that can be part of your listing presentation. You can talk about that we own our own finance company, escrow, and insurance as well. So now jumping into our LOI. An LOI is a soft offer. It's not an actual offer. It's just a letter of intent. That's what it stands for. So it's a rough draft to a contract. It's negotiable, and signing it does not say that you are truly purchasing it on those terms. The main parts and points that you want to pay attention to on the LOI is the date and the property address, the buyers, the sellers, the price, and especially the terms. Now make sure, even if it's a soft offer, it still needs to be signed. All LOIs and contracts must have signatures to be valid. So as we go down, the seller, if you find a property, you're working with a buyer and you find a property but you're not too sure who the actual seller is, a lot of times you might say per record. It's very easy and fast for us to type this contract up, and you don't have to search who owns the property, because that information is sort of irrelevant at this time. The purchaser, that's going to be your client, and you're going to put it in whatever name you might want to choose, and or assignee, because if you open a contract with, say, just your name, but you're working on a vesting title, like an LLC or a partnership, and that's how you're going to finish, you want to be able to change the docs during escrow. So if you say and or assignee, then you can assign the escrow to your entity.
And what happens if it's, the wrong name, essentially, and they didn't put that?
So before the end of closing, you will have to double check to see what the name of the vesting is. And if it's incorrect, all documents have to be changed, and you're looking to possibly extend your escrow.
So that's a whole process.
It's a process. Yeah. It's not a too timely of a process, but all the documents do have to be updated. Mm-hmm. So the contract has to reflect the current names.
Gotcha.
A lot of this can be done with an assignment or an addendum, or escrow might write an amendment to the contract. Going down, you're going to put down the purchase price that you're looking to offer. The down payment is generally going to, your earnest money deposit is generally 3% of the purchase price. So that is earnest money deposit, your EMD. You're going to send that to escrow from your buyer, and that goes directly into an escrow account, or if it's coming from an accommodator, or if you're using a title service, they'll put it into a bank, generally sometimes an interest earning account. 3% on the EMD. When you're showing properties to your clients, you're going to want to try to get them into a property where they can afford 35% down. That's going to guarantee the best financing when you put down a third. Now a lot of LTVs are going at 25%, especially for maybe multifamily. or a building that is high producing. So if your client can only put down 25%, we'll have to really look at the property and to see what kind of lending options they have. Again, you're going to want to talk to Michael Katz in Peak Commercial Finance and get an idea of what your buyer can actually potentially purchase. The due diligence period, you can just write that in. This is all typed. There's already generic statements in these boxes on our forms, and you just change the dates and the names. And your due diligence periods, as we'll go through on the actual purchase agreement, is generally about 17 days standard on the contract. But depending on your type of escrow, your property, your buyer, we can change that. So we'll get to that in a moment. Also in your LOI, you're going to include your financial contingencies, if they are taking a loan or not, and the closing date. How long do you intend escrow to be? The closing cost, there's a small verbiage about allocation of costs and fees. Most of those details are worked out in the actual purchase agreement. And then also there's a space for a 1031 exchange. This just lets them know that your client is in an exchange or the money's from an exchange. So sometimes you have to coordinate with the selling side to allow for more time if you're in the middle of an exchange. Some sellers do not entertain that. Some do not want to risk you not closing on your property. So you always, when you're submitting an offer, find out if they're willing to work with an exchange buyer. You do want to put an expiration date on this document. Most of the time it's about 3 days or 48 to 72 hours. You don't want your contracts or LOIs to not have an expiration date, because you don't want to be liable 6 months down the road. All right, so now we've covered the LOI. It's a generic blueprint of what the purchase contract's going to look like. It's a very easy way to negotiate deals and transactions without it being very intense and sending contracts back and forth for signatures. But when we do get to the actual purchase sale agreement, it starts off with the disclosure, and that one is going to actually be the real estate agency relationship. We have to disclose who we are as an agent, which firm we work for, and who we are representing. This is a 2-page form that starts at the beginning of every purchase and sale agreement. It's already embedded into the contract from car forms. If you're not using car forms, you must add this when you're doing AIR forms. Also now is a requirement of a disclosure in all contracts is the wire fraud disclosure. This is also attached to the purchase and sale agreement for commercial properties, but it must be filled out and signed. It's just an acknowledgement of wire frauds and the stipulations and repercussions and things like that. So, and then the next page is where an actual contract starts. Most importantly is the date on the top, and that's going to be right here at the top left. And as you work your way down, you can ask for the property. The next space is for the buyer's name and the seller's name. Again, you might want to use the current name plus and or assignee unless you're 100% positive that the name that's on the contract is the name that's going to close on the property. You're going to need to identify if that is an individual, a corporation, a partnership, or a trust possibly. It kind of gives an idea from the seller of who they're working with and what kind of business that you're in. You're now then going to go down and section D, the close of escrow. That's going to be either 30 days, 60 days, and it's from date of acceptance. Does anyone know what date of acceptance is?
Yeah, the day they said, okay, we're ready for that.
So you're correct. It's the day that the seller signs the contract. So whatever date that the seller signs the contract is the date of acceptance. And that's where all of your important dates are going to correlate with. So for close of escrow, it's 30, 60, 90 days after the date of acceptance. Not when you first wrote the contract or submitted the LOI weeks prior. The purchase price, you're gonna be able to type in the number and it will populate in a Word form. Double check your purchase prices, and especially on listing agreements. Make sure that the listing agreement shows the exact dollar amount that you're selling it for. There's been many mistakes where someone has left off a 0, which translates into missing a comma. So instead of 100,000, you're selling for 10,000. That's significant. Again, initial deposit, that's gonna be about 3%, and that's written on the contract as well. If there's any financing in this transaction, you're going to write down how much you're actually gonna put in as a deposit, how much you're gonna ideally take the loan out for, and this is all broken down within our contract. It lets the seller understand how much you're leveraging. If they see that you're only putting down 10, 15, 20%, they might not accept your offer because they don't maybe believe that you can finance that or get the loan with that amount down. So there's also a box in section 3C for all cash. As soon as you hit all cash, all of the loan contingencies and everything like that, it goes gray. It's not applicable to the transaction any longer. All cash changes things. Additional financing terms is available. So say that we need extra days, or that you're gonna take out 2 loans, a first and a second, you're gonna have to disclose that with upfront. And there's a spaces provided as well. We have the loan terms. You have about 3 days as an applicant to show that you've applied for your loan. You have 3 days from the days of acceptance to prove that you're already working on your loan to keep this deal continuing and work going along. If your buyer is very confident in obtaining a loan, say they're putting down 50% or more, and they're very confident in the property and their bank financing team, you might put down no loan contingencies. As soon as you hit that, the other loan applicable spaces will go away. So these are the kind of questions to keep in mind to talk to your buyers about. And you should know all of this before you write contracts, because you're probably gonna have to look at specific properties that will help him achieve the purchase. Now in section 5, you have addendum and advisories. This is a section that allows you to attach other reports and addendums that might be. So say if your offer is a backup offer, there's another form to represent that it's a backup offer. So if you click this box, the form populates and the information populates as well. The purchase price, the buyer's and seller's information. If it's a short sale, that's another addendum that might get used as well. If you're purchasing something from probate court, also an addendum or an attachment. So these are just readily available to add to your contract. Right under there, you're gonna have other terms, and this really can be anything. The other terms is the seller must vacate the premises at the close of escrow. Simple things as that. Or the seller will retain laundry income for 1 month after. Whatever you've negotiated and that needs to be put out into words, that's not part of the standard contract, that's gonna go into your other terms section. Now the allocation of costs and fees. This is a pretty important section. This is on page 2 and carries over to page 3. The seller is gonna pay now when I talk about these costs, this is in a traditional setting. Traditionally, the seller is gonna pay for the natural hazard order. Now, all commercial properties, you need to order an NHD, natural hazard disclosure. Now, that comes with the checklist and also the report. So you need the seller to fill that out, and they are generally obligated to pay for it as well. Don't just get the regular NHD, get it with the environmental as well. Just in case anything does pop up, that environmental already encompasses some other things that you might find on the prelim. Now for prelims as well, you need to get that for all commercial properties. And if you don't have any connections with the title rep right now, please talk to me later. We have plenty of title reps to connect with. Alright. And so then our government requirements, retrofitting, generally as a buyer rep, you're going to select the seller to be responsible for the retrofitting. They need to be retrofit compliant. That is a new Los Angeles law. If they are not, sometimes the seller might take care of the fee, they might reduce it off the top purchase price, or you might come to terms, buyer and seller, cutting the fees in half, or some negotiation like that. But you cannot resell the property without the building being retrofitted and compliant. The seller also is going to pay for smoke alarms, carbon monoxide, and any other compliance issues with a 9A report. That's what traditionally you're going to try to offer. You're going to protect your buyer because that's your buy side. And then the other costs. The seller is going to pay for the county tax and the city tax for the transfer fees. Escrow and title. This is your opportunity for us to retain business and to keep our sales culture alive by submitting escrow hub for our insurance, for the escrow company. You can choose any officer we have in-house. May Arcala is our main escrow officer here. So I please encourage you to use our escrows the first couple of transactions. It's in-house, it makes your transaction very easy. So that's where you have your chance to elect there. If you have any relationships with the title rep, you can put their name down for title as well, for the insurance policy. So, and then you're gonna probably go all the way down to section C on number 8 on page 3. It says items excluded from the sale. The items excluded from the sale, this is when someone might have personal property on their real property. You might see like liquor stores or convenience stores, and they might have like one of those like little horses in front, you put a quarter in and have kids sit on them. That might be personal property. He might want to exclude that from the sale. He says, you can have the building, but I'm taking the kid's toy. Yeah. Or there's a mural around, or a little playground in front, or there's just maybe there's a statue in front of the property, but it's on the ground and it's fixed. But it's personal property, and they want to take it with them. That's what you would exclude from the sale.
You have to have in a contract, is that going with the property or not going?
Correct.
Yeah,
and this is a space to highlight those things.
Yeah.
Say the seller owns the washer and dryers, and they want to take them with them, they might try to exclude that from the sale.
Yeah.
So it goes back and forth either way. On page 4, one of the more important ones is tenant estoppel certificates. Does anyone know what an estoppel is? Okay, great. So an estoppel is basically a confirmation from the tenant and the landlord of the current lease and rent paid. All it is a form that the landlord fills out, says, Mandana lives at this apartment unit and she pays $1,800 a month in rent. And then she gets the certificate that he filled out, and she approves and says, yes, I have been paying this and I have a 12-month lease. So it just fills it out, and it confirms the rent roll for the buyer.
So it's like has apartment building, every single person has to fill out?
Correct.
Like if you have 50 apartment?
It can be a lot of work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so everybody has to fill
Yes.
and sign it.
Every tenant. So even if in a retail space and there's 3 little stores in a strip center, and you get an estoppel certificate for them, they have to fill out their lease term and their rent payment individually, each one. If you have 150 units in an apartment complex, 150 certificates.
Okay.
Okay. And for a buyer, they want to know that the rent on the rent roll is actually what they're paying.
Yeah.
They don't want to get undercut, or they want, if the seller's taking in a little on the side or.
So what about like in 150 out of like 5-10 people, they don't want to sign it? They don't want.
That's up to the buyer. That would be up to the buyer. But if you are checking this box, it's up to the seller.
It's not going to stop the sale.
It should not. But if it's questioned and they don't believe that it's true, the buyer might hold back because.
Yeah. Okay.
There's another section about condominiums and HOAs and things like that, and we can get into that on another time. So let's just think about more of our traditional commercial properties. Section 17, again, this talks about title investing. That's just something that, again, we talked about, needs to be situated either during escrow, but it must be done prior to close. If you want to get that vesting at least 10 days to 2 weeks before you're ready to close, just because there's a lot of other documents for closing, and you want that all done. Probably one of the most important parts of this contract is Section 18, and that's your timelines and periods of your due diligence period. Like I said, the buyer has 17 days to do their inspection standard, and the seller has 7 days standard from the date of acceptance to give you all their books and records. So they both have spaces next to them to where you can either change those periods to be shorter or longer. If you're doing a 15-day close, you might want those books and records in 3 days. If the buyer already is going to have a long period and you want a long escrow anyways, you might just say 30 days for the buyer to have his inspection, going through the books and records and just any other inspections that they have. If you ordered a termite inspection, your appraisal needs a little bit more time. You can put any amount of days on here as you want. But call the selling agent, feel him out and see what the seller's like and how long and strict of an escrow he's looking to have. You want someone that's going to be flexible. Compensation, broker's compensation. There's not a space in here for you to write down the exact amount of commission that you've discussed. That comes from the listing agreement and also whatever you just negotiated with the other representing agent. So you can go ahead and write in other terms on this contract, your compensation percentage and split. Or
what is that? It's a minimum and a maximum there.
So, I mean, we don't have a minimum or a maximums. If someone wants to sell their property and give you a 10% split on an apartment building, that's great. That's amazing.
I thought 1% or something
most,
like this.
most of the time, though, you're going to get. We're looking to achieve 5 or 6%. That's our goal. That's when we're going in our listing agreement. That's what we want. Now, representing one side, you want to get more than 2% generally. And that's depending on the sale price of the property.
Yeah.
We had a very large transaction, and the whole purchase or the commission for all of it for both sides was 1%. So you would split 0.5%.
Yeah.
But it's on such a significant transaction that it makes sense. But if you're taking $1 million listing and you're charging 1%,
That's not enough.
it's kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So. I really would suggest not going below 3% unless it's a significantly priced property, because if you're taking a listing at 3%, you can only give away 1.5%.
Yeah.
Other agents on the outside, they truly might not show your property to their clients because they know they're working for such a small amount of money. So try to push your sellers to giving out a little bit stronger commission because it goes for marketing as well. It's not just your money, it's an incentive to get that property on the market and sold. What I was gonna say is also, there's a compensation agreement in car forms and air forms. If you wanna sign that prior to the purchase and sale agreement when you're talking with the other agent, it's probably best that you get your commission written down in paper somewhere. So you could always put it in this contract so it's signed and acknowledged. The worst is at the end of escrow that there's debates about what the percentage allocation is. So if you can clear that up at the beginning, the best. Disputes and resolutions for mediation. There's a subsection here that just talks about mediation and arbitration. And we're going to be, and you just need to find out what they're open to. We'd rather do an arbitration over mediation or vice versa, just finding out through which client prefers. Most of it's more and more disclosures. Reviewing it to the end, page 10, again, there's an expiration of offer at the very bottom before the signatures. Again, 48 hours, 72 hours. Make sure you have a date in here. It already is a time specified. It's at the end of business day, so it's 5 p.m. And this is a car form, so California only, so it doesn't matter about time zones. Make sure you've got all your signatures in here, and you personally, your agent information needs to be filled out in here. This helps the other cooperating broker and escrow as well. Okay. And at the very end of the contract, it's gonna have two more disclosures. This one is the buyer's inspectory advisory. This basically just kind of reminds buyers of things to look at and to remember when they're going through on a purchase. So remember, commercial purchases, commercial investment or real estate, it's an investment, it's a risk. There's a risk involved, and that's why we have disclosures. It's not as tight as residential because they're considered consumers, and consumers need to be protected. But investments are risks, it's like gambling. So there's a less guidelines, but they still want to make sure everybody is practicing smart and right habits. And the very last one is the possible representation of one more than buyer or seller. This allows your buyer, or if you're representing the seller, when they fill this out, this allows you to work with the buyer at the same time. So you can double end a deal. That's what this basically says though. It says that you could be representing multiple people and working with multiple people at the same time. It's just an acknowledgement. It's just to let them, so that you're not trying to be shady by taking a listing and then bringing your own buyer. This allows you to do such with the acknowledgement of the seller. So, and that is our purchase contract. It's about 17 pages long, and that is for commercial properties on this one. So, anyone have any questions?
My question is, what is the responsibility of seller, the things that the seller has to pay? You mentioned is the fire alarm, carbon dioxide.
The carbon monoxide compliance, that's part of the 9A compliance. So
That's it?
So they have to be responsible for the compliance of a hot water heater in the property, and this is mainly multifamily. And carbon monoxide, smoke alarms. The seller's going to pay for the county and the city taxes. You could suggest for them to pay the full natural hazard disclosure and the environmental. And they'll probably take care of your prelim as well.
Okay, so what is the buyer's responsibility?
They'll have their own closing costs. They'll have to pay for either escrow fees and any other reports that they elect to have, say a termite report. You can always try to push those costs onto the seller in the contract. It does have a box for buyer and seller. You could split the fees as well. So it depends on the discretion of your buyer at the time. But generally you want to put as many fees on the seller as you can.
Okay.
Anything to add, Danny? What's the most important part of the contract?
Yeah. Okay, let's continue.
No, I haven't shown you.
Oh, but this is the car, right?
This is car forms, yeah.
What about the
ARR forms?
Yeah.
So the ARR forms are structured a little bit differently. They're gonna look more probably like a lawyer wrote them. They're a little bit more flexible in that you can redline and add other verbiage to them. They're used nationwide, so more people are familiar with them, especially in commercial. And you can manipulate them to any way that you like, but they basically have the same questions and spaces for a standard contract. We're talking about price, terms, and identifying who and where the property is.
What about the commission? Where do we put in the commission?
So in CAR forms, in AR forms, commission, there are separate agreements, or you could always write that in your other term sections and on any point in there. Any other questions for contracts or LOIs? All right, well, thanks for coming in today.